Good afternoon. This is Dave Mader from the Office of Management and Budget, and with me is my good colleague Dave Liebrick from the Treasury Department, and we'd like to welcome our panel members as well as the audience for this afternoon's conversation about the progress that both Treasury and OMB are making with regard to the implementation of the Data Act. As many of you know, and I'm sure that everyone who is participating either in the studio or on this video cast, recognizing the significance of the Data Act. We are rapidly approaching our one-year anniversary, and what we'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about the progress that we've made over the past year, and more importantly, solicit ideas, comments, suggestions as we move forward towards some of the very significant milestones that are contained in the Act. As you all are well aware, the Data Act builds on legislation that's been in existence for probably 7 or 8 years now. And the Data Act really takes what we've done in the past to a whole new dimension. And when fully implemented, we will now be able to provide not only to the government, but also to stakeholders, all of the spending of the U.S. government. And this, I will tell you, is a monumental undertaking. And in order to implement the significance of this act, what we have done along with the Treasury Department is basically take the major provisions and divide the responsibility for these key elements between Treasury and OMB. And what I'd like to start with is talking a little bit about the partnership that exists between the Treasury Department and OMB. While the Act specifies the responsibilities for each, the relationship that Dave and I and our respective teams have built is one of working together over the next 2 years to accomplish the significant undertaking that the Data Act requires. For OMB, the responsibility is twofold. One is to look at a definitions that have been used across government for years, whether it's in procurement or in grants, and understand which of those data elements need to be standardized and how they can be used. And Dave will go into a little bit more detail on how we're actually going to move data around to achieve the outcomes of the Data Act. But the key is really getting an understanding both within the government as well as the external users of this data to agree on a set of standard definitions. And we are on a path to begin releasing the first tranche of those definitions sometime in early May. And then over the ensuing months, we will be subsequently releasing these various definitions. The second major component that the OMB is responsible for deals with a pilot study to look at reducing administrative burden, particularly in the grants community. And we have engaged the Department of Health and Human Services as our partner in actually building the study definition and actually implementing over the next 2 years how we can, as a government, achieve further reductions and further simplify how applying for, whether it be a grant or a loan, could be made easier for the recipients. What I'd like to do is ask Dave to talk now a little bit about the responsibilities that the Treasury Department has and how they interact with the responsibilities that OMB has.
Thanks, Dave. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the challenges that we've been facing and then really talk some more about the way Treasury is approaching some of the work streams that we have. But I want to really echo something that Dave has said. It's a really significant undertaking, and to move the federal government as a whole in something like this is pretty big. And I think the thing that has been very, encouraging to me is that Dave and I, as we've gone out and spoken to the federal community, they get the need for this. And while there is not funding attached to this bill, and that would have been nice, it is still, I think, within something that is worthwhile pursuing and something that is that the federal community sees the real value of. As Dave points out, our ability today to pull information from a variety of systems is not easy. These systems were not designed to actually collect information in a centralized way. And so one of the challenges that we face is looking at a way to do something which is not going to be a large systems initiative, expensive systems initiative, but rather how do we work within an existing framework to establish standards and then figure out ways to extract that data from the federal agencies in a way that's understandable not only to the federal agencies but to the public at large. And I think while the Data Act is really designed to give the public better information about federal spending, and that's a very worthy objective, it's also really about making the federal government understand its data better too. And I think that's really about making government operate better, and that's a very worthwhile objective. So we've talked about a data-centric approach rather than a system-centric approach. We shouldn't have Treasury be building large systems. And so the data standards become very important in that, but also looking at technology and ways to actually reach that data within existing systems is important. So one of the things Treasury has been doing, along with OMB, is doing a couple of pilots to sort of see whether this concept of understanding and finding data in the systems, whether it be in a procurement system or a grant system, and extracting that information to allow it to be presented in a way that's understandable and usable. One work stream that Treasury is responsible for is a data mapping or a blueprint exercise. And really what that is we've gone into agencies and said, where does the key information reside today? Which systems does it reside in today? And frankly, what we're finding is in most cases, they reside in similar systems about 70 or 80% of the time across agencies. So when we go to a different agency and say, can you do this mapping? And let's give you a little head start here. You can sort of see where this information resides in other agencies, and you can start from that standpoint and see where you may be a little bit different to really accelerate the process. And that's been a very useful and a good process so far. The second piece then is how do you have a standard language in which you're using? And Treasury recently put out a notice at the end of last year and posted on the GitHub recently our views on going forward with respect to a data exchange. And everyone is welcome to visit the GitHub and make comments and take a look at that. And we really encourage you to do that because that really is one of the key elements of this legislation. How important it is to get feedback from the variety of communities as we're going forward. And the GitHub has been a really useful forum for doing that. And as we're looking at a number of things in this project, we're really relying on that as a way for you all to see what we're doing, as also to give us input and feedback on where things are going. Webinars like this are really great and they're important, but sometimes they're difficult to schedule and difficult to do. And so for us, the GitHub is a way to sort of keep people informed on a real-time basis. Before I move into some of the other streams, I would also mention that Treasury recently took over USA Spending and about a year ago. And during the past year, we've gone out and asked questions about how can we improve USA Spending? What are some of the limitations on the existing site that had been up? And really, there had been not any improvements to USA Spending since 2009. So there's been, as I think people are well aware, there's questions about the underlying data. We decided at Treasury when we took the project on not to address that issue because the Data Act is really addressing that issue. And so it would be expensive and not necessarily the most productive use of time to really get at that. What we attempted to do was make it more usable to the public. And that was a lot of the feedback that we had. And we also had a lot of feedback that there wasn't much support behind it. So if someone asked a question or they had a comment, it was very hard to get feedback there. One of the things that since we've launched the site a little over a week ago, we've gotten feedback. And the GitHub has been a very useful mechanism to get that feedback and have made some improvements already. I think one of the things that we did in the onset was we probably weren't as cognizant of the different levels of users in USA Spending. There are casual users, people who come on it periodically and want to get information. There are more sophisticated users who want to use the analytical tools that you have available on the site itself. And then thirdly, there are those users who just want the data. I think we had done I would say a pretty good job on the first category of making it more usable to the general public. probably needed some work on the other two categories. And so some of the feedback that we're getting right now is improvements that we can make on the site to make it more usable for the other two communities. I think we've solved one of the problems for the people who want to download the data and made that more accessible. But what we've done and what we're continuing to do is we've received over close to 30 comments on the GitHub, and we've addressed about 15 of those already, about half of them. I encourage you, if you have other comments on USA spending you'd like to give, go to the GitHub and provide those comments. We're prioritizing the list of improvements that we need to make going forward, and we'll continue to make improvements, like the keyword search, which is another one that that came up in the initial launch. So we're committed to making that work, and we're also committed to making sure that if people have comments or questions, we're being responsive. We're trying to have a standard of less than 2 days in responding to those questions, which I think is a significant improvement over USA spending. So I will just kind of close by saying that this is a really very significant effort, and Dave and I, we recognize the level of a challenge that we have. It's been impressive how the federal communities have come together on this effort. The different committees and the CFO community, the grants community, the procurement community. We know we have a lot of work ahead of us. We know that it's important to get feedback from the various stakeholders, and we're looking forward to really successful implementation. Thank you for joining us, and we're going to take a short break to move to the panelists.
Good afternoon and welcome back. We wanted to really start our next phase of our webcast today. My name is Karen Lamb with the Office of Management and Budget. With me is Christina Ho with the Department of Treasury, and we are incredibly excited to welcome our panelists today to this very long-awaited webcast on Data Act implementation. Before we start and really dig into, I think, the meat of our webcast, which is to talk about implementation and to answer questions and have a dialogue, wanted to introduce everyone on our panel who's with us today from our non-federal communities. First to my left is Sean Moulton. Sean is the Director of Open Government Policy at the Center of Effective Government. Next to Sean is Helena Sims. Helena is the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the Association of Government Accountants, also known as AGA. And finally, Herschel Chandler, the co-lead of Data Act, Transparency and Federal Financials Project, and a principal at IUI. Thank you so much for being here. We have been so grateful for your partnership over the past months and frankly years as we've worked on federal spending transparency issues. Before we get to the questions, we thought it would be wonderful just to take a minute and have each of you speak to the interests that your communities have in the open government, the recipient, and the industry communities as you think about Data Act implementation and what you hope out of our ongoing work in that area. So first to Sean.
Sure. I think for the advocacy community, the open government community, I think the main thing we'd like to see come out of this is really greater transparency, access to more information, so that greater accountability can be the result, so that we can have thousands of people, reporters, researchers, organizations, academics, all digging through the data and acting in their own way as Inspector General. But we understand, I think our community very much understands that if this is just an add-on aspect of reporting and information and transparency, then it's going to be very hard to maintain. So we want this to be something that works for the agencies as well, something that gives them tools to manage their own budget, their own spending, identify patterns and areas where savings can be made. And if we can get those two things and put them together, then we've got a very, very powerful tool, both for inside and outside of government.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Helena.
Hi. I'm Helena Sims again, the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for the Association of Government Accountants. And in that role, I'm very pleased to represent the recipient organizations, the groups that receive the $600 billion a year that the federal government sends to non-federal entities to implement programs. I have to say that I am very happy to be able to be here with both OMB and Treasury and my fellow association representatives, because this has been a partnership from the beginning. I appreciate your willingness to work with us and to hear what we have to say. A little bit about AGA and why AGA is interested in this. The Association of Government Accountants is a nonprofit organization. We have 15,000 members across the country from the federal, state, and local levels of government. Our members are not just accountants, which is one reason we care so much about the Data Act. We also have grants professionals, procurement, performance people, auditors, inspectors general are members of AGA. And I wanted to just briefly say what it is our organization and our members like about the Data Act. First of all, it's geared toward reducing burden and cost for recipients. This is very important to our members, the burden reduction. Also, there are wonderful possibilities with the Data Act. There are ways of simplifying reporting that we have to do on the $600 billion. There is the possibility of eliminating forms, of filling out information just once, and then not having to redo it for multiple federal agencies. It gives us a way to understand where our money is going. But perhaps the thing that I like most about it are the Section 5 pilots that we'll talk about later. And it's after the pilots that the recipient organizations really become more involved in the Data Act based on what we learned. I can't stress enough how important it is as we go into the pilots for the federal and the state governments, for other recipients to be working together on implementation. I'm excited about the pilots and the opportunities they offer for us to work together on how to implement the Data Act, how to serve the public better, and how to better manage our programs together. And that concludes my opening statement.
Thank you, Helena and Herschel.
Sure. I'm Herschel Chandler. I'm a principal with IUI. ACT-IAC is where government and industry leaders collaborate. I can't think of a recent thing that's come about that requires that collaboration more to enable success than the Data Act. The Data Act provides a single standard to integrate financial data from scores of systems across all of federal government. It includes a governance structure to govern that data, the quality of the data, not only when we turn the systems on, but the quality of the data long term, because data changes over time. This capability will be transformational. This capability will enable fact-based decision making. Having this consistent integrated store of quality information is an innovation opportunity for industry, which is a big part of ACT-IAC. Data scientists from around the world can apply their methods to optimize the process of delivering government services as well as the outcome of those services. We are excited about the opportunities that this represents to improve our government. So let me jump into our first question, talking about innovation and opportunities and change, because really what we're talking about here is change. Changing the government doesn't happen fast. I've seen that. Will Treasury and OMB regularly host town halls like the one that was hosted last year as part of your effort to communicate and collaborate with this change? How will that look?
It's a great question, and one of the things that we've learned in our implementation of the Data Act, and frankly informed by our work under the Recovery Act and our initial work under the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act, is that we can't communicate enough. The question is, how do we just get that information out and have that dialogue in meaningful ways? The fall town hall that Treasury hosted was just an exceptional opportunity to really kick off our conversations. What we know is that given our technology that we have, there are multiple opportunities and tools to reach folks. One is a town hall, certainly. Another are things like this, a webcast that is broadly distributed and available. A third is GitHub. That allows for folks who may not enjoy necessarily watching a screen really have an opportunity to engage at their leisure as they want. And so I think to the core of your question, Herschel, which is, are we going to engage? Absolutely. I think there are so many different opportunities for us to do that. I think this just represents one, the town hall another, and certainly I think we are very open to using all the different forums that you and others offer to get the word out and collaborate.
I'll jump in. I appreciated the comments in the opening remarks about the USA spending relaunch and that there have been some concerns, certainly among the open government community, about some lost functionality. And I think those are the more experienced users who want to be able to dig into the data. And I guess in terms of outreach, there was some surprise that the relaunch happened. We know there was outreach at one point to get ideas and input, but there was never any real outreach to test the site or to get comments on the site before it was officially launched. And it seemed like, honestly, a bit of a stumble in that it was launched and then you're getting all these comments and moving quickly, and we appreciate that, to try and make improvements. But so I guess the question is, why wasn't, given the interest in outreach, why wasn't there more outreach before the final launch? And then as you're following up and you're going with GitHub, is there going to be an actual schedule? David mentioned a prioritized list, but I haven't seen it, and I know people are out there wondering what the priorities are and how long they're going to take. So
I'll take that.
Okay.
Thank you for the question. So as Dave mentioned earlier, that we intended to really improve the site to make it more user-friendly and more transparent. That has been the intent all along. When Treasury took over the program responsibility a year ago, that we looked at all the recommendations. Some of them have been long-standing, that came from multiple communities. We also looked at the options in order to make some impactful improvements within a relatively short period of time. So we decided to leverage the recovery.gov design and platform, which has been really gotten a lot of positive feedback from the OpenGov community and industry. So that was the approach we took. And through those process, we gather information that have been existed before, and also through the recovery.gov focus group, we felt that we have gotten some of the things that we needed to address. We now learn, as Dave has mentioned earlier, that since the refresh, that we have missed some of the communities and the things, and those would have been, if we had had the opportunity to do some, say, beta tests, that would have been identified. Those are lessons learned that we have, I certainly have learned that lesson. And we are responding to feedback very aggressively. We heard from multiple communities the different kind of feedback, and we actually have made some changes to improve. And we're also continue to work aggressively to bring back some of the features that the different user community have voiced. So, and that's another reason that we started the GitHub issue tracker, because that's a forum to give people the opportunity to post issues, get feedback, and get updates.
If I could follow up on the issue of outreach and reaching out to people, and how we're going to go about dealing with implementing this. I recently talked to somebody from a state auditor's office and asked if they were excited about the Data Act. And this particular individual works a lot with data, is very analytical by nature, and he felt that the Data Act offered us a great deal of potential, kind of the things I was talking about before. The issue for a lot of state governments and other recipients is that they have a lot on their plate right now. They're working very hard to do what they have to do already. So the question came up. He said, I'm excited about it, but we don't have any money to do this. And so it's hard to know how we're going to fit in implementing the Data Act with all of the other things we have going on, despite how interested we are in it. I know the federal government didn't get funding for it either, but the people downstream didn't get funding. So how do we overcome that hurdle? Do you have any thoughts into how we can move forward based on the lack of funding?
Helen, that's a great question, because I think this quandary comes up at the federal level constantly. And going back to a point, Sean, that you'd made in your opening, the Data Act can't be seen as an add-on activity to what we already do. It is fundamentally going to be a different way that we do business. In creating and using data standards that cut across federal communities and federal agencies, it offers this opportunity to rethink how we manage and prioritize our efforts, understand what impact we have, analyze that data so we do have fact-based decision making, and really have a conversation from a transparency perspective, have a dialogue with the public on how we're spending our money, and how we move forward based on what we've already done. And so I think our challenge, and I think the state example, Helena, is a beautiful one, because our challenge is the same one that states and localities and frankly everybody involved feels, which is how can we make sure that this is not an ancillary effort in addition to the already full and overflowing set of responsibilities every recipient, government, and organization has. How can we think about this implementation of the Data Act as beginning sort of the next step of our journey in thinking about how we reframe how government does its work?
And I think, Helena, that's a really good point. One of the things that as we are working on the implementation in the data standard, we realize the impact to the downstream recipients, even in how we set the data standard that's for agency reporting. Because however we define the data element, some of them will have to be collected from downstream recipients. So understanding that impact is really important, and that's why, as Karen mentioned, how engaging the stakeholder and get input is really important in this effort. And we are also thinking about the approach that we're taking is trying, as Dave mentioned earlier, the data-centric approach is not to keep thinking about building a large system. And we're prototyping some of these efforts to try to figure out if there are innovative ways to leverage technology to actually leverage the stakeholders' collective mind and to come up with a really sustainable and repeatable approach.
A lot of this makes me think what's near and dear to our heart is implementation. Okay, at the end of the day, there's going to have to be some systems that are built there are systems there now that have the data. They have to get data out of the systems. Changes will have to be made, whether it's a data crosswalk, whatever the case is. So you guys are working together, as you just said, to look at what will work. You're going to come up with some guidance for how this should be implemented. Are you going to be able to share some details of how you got to that guidance, and what format do you see that guidance in? Are you going to list some directives, and more importantly, are we going to continue the collaborative process on working on those directives?
So let me take your last question first, which is yes, we are absolutely. I think this session and frankly all of our conversations with the public have been hopefully sort of our opportunities to have that collaboration. I think going back to something that you all spoke to as we began this discussion this afternoon, the Data Act represents a different way of doing business. So I think some of our traditional ways of thinking about implementing a statute are going to be different. I think GitHub is just an excellent example of that. We have, rarely in sort of the past 10 years have we done that kind of public dialogue before we are ready to get to a place of finalizing. And so, where we are thinking about guidance, we've been working across the federal community on guidance. There are going to be lots of different missives we anticipate over the next couple of years that will be in all different forms. They could be on GitHub, they could be formal guidance, it could be what have you, because there are so many different dimensions to how you implement it. As we are to your question, Herschel, about a series of directives, I think our opportunity with all of our non-federal stakeholders as well as our federal community is to determine what are all the areas that need to be discussed in a set of guidance documents, GitHub, instructions, or otherwise. Some of them may be very formal. Some of them may be very informal, like webcasts like this, where we can clarify some of our policy directions. Taking a page out of OMB's work last year on the Uniform Grants Guidance, where there was a very clear and straightforward path to publishing, coming up with, devising, collaborating on the policy. Since then, we've recognized that it's not just setting the policy, it's the implementation that is very critical. And so things that we've done like FAQs and webcasts and other forums to discuss how we implement are going to be really important. We could envision there being multiple mechanisms that we use to implement. Traditional guidance is certainly one, but there are lots of others.
That's interesting to me from the standpoint of talking about missives and directives and information you'll be getting out. It seems as though one of the things is, I love the Data Act and I'm excited about it, I guess because I'm a nerd. But aside from that, for people that are finding they have to comply with the missives, they have to comply with the directives, particularly at the federal level, since that's where they have to deal with it first, what are you doing to explain the benefits of the Data Act to federal agencies for people who may not just think that data standardization is the most wonderful thing in the world?
It's a great question, and I think going back to the point of how this can't be an add-on, part of our conversation with the federal community has been very enthusiastic responses from our federal agency partners of how important this is. I think moving from how important it is to the very technical details of how you get it done, I think is where we're at right now, because I think everybody recognizes that this is a game changer. Everyone recognizes there are some technical pieces of work that need to be done. I think to your point, Helena, how do we really sort of thread the needle between that high-level set of outcomes we want, have fact-based decision-making, data-driven decision-making, down to data standards in a way that is understood by a program, has benefits to them. One of the ways in which we are continuing those conversations with federal agencies is recognizing that federal agencies don't work in their stovepipes in achieving their outcomes. So no one department has a unitary focus that other departments may not also have play and missions focused in the same area. And so increasingly recognizing that cross-agency programs have similar missions with similar goals, that spending as we make federal awards to recipients for a particular purpose may cut across multiple programs, across multiple agencies. Having data that allows you to understand all those different sources of funding and what the purpose of the funding is provides programs with a better opportunity to understand whether or not they're strategically funding as they should, and whether or not we should think about different ways to collaborate across programs. The federal government is a huge organization that has, in the past, sometimes acted as a set of very separate entities. And I think the Data Act offers this opportunity to bring those voices together and join them and collect our efforts into one federal government set of work.
Since the enactment last year, Treasury and OMB have been working, spending a lot of time talking to agency to articulate the value proposition of the Data Act. We definitely feel as excited about this opportunity because it does have the potential to transform the government if you do it right. You could make it a add-on because it would just be like a compliance exercise. So we have been very thoughtful about how to architect the approach and also align incentive to make sure that what the agencies are doing are not just for compliance. Because I haven't heard anyone across the federal government who do not see the value of having better access to their data, because it will help them make better decisions and it will support their mission better.
I think one thing to just add is that Treasury and Christina and your team have done just a really excellent job reaching out to agencies to understand how things are working now. Because there is a reason why business processes have existed the way they have. And so to the value proposition point, there's an opportunity to align why things have been done before with potentially a new way of how we think about data, so as to not supersede sort of the purpose of how processes have worked in the past, but just realign to a different process but meet the same objectives. And I think the Department of Treasury has been doing just extraordinary outreach across the federal community to understand how things are currently done so that we can move forward for Data Act implementation.
So picking up on that, I mean, I think it's great that you're hearing such enthusiasm from the agencies and that they recognize the importance of this. But you must also be hearing some concerns, as we've already talked about. This is a big undertaking. Yeah. We've gone down pretty far down a road where our data is different and separated, and some of the systems don't want to talk to each other too easily. So I'm curious as to what you see, having talked to all these agencies and sort of been in that director's seat, getting a lot of the information, what you see as some of the biggest challenges. And specifically, I'd like to know whether or not you see any challenges in meeting some of the deadlines that the law set out for you in terms of deliverables, at the 1 year, 2 year, and down the road, whether or not you think that's the right time frame or whether or not there's going to be challenges in meeting that time frame.
Well, I'll let Christina speak to the conversations with the agencies, where I know that Treasury has been leading those efforts and those discussions. I think you're absolutely right. There are concerns. And I think Dave Liebrick articulated those quite well as we began our discussion today. One is certainly funding. There was no additional funds appropriated for this effort. However, notwithstanding that, the question is how can we still, do as much as we can. As we move forward, I think the challenge and the opportunity for us is to figure out that sweet spot, right, where you can integrate this activity in a way that does not obviate our ability to do the mission, and hopefully enhances that as well. We fully recognize the statutory deadlines, and we know the upcoming milestones that are for us. And I will tell you, I have been just so incredibly impressed at our federal community partners who have sort of added on this activity of thinking about work and Data Act implementation and aggressively taking that recognizing our statutory deadlines. So certainly there are concerns. I think across the federal government, we recognize the concerns, but we're going to still march forward because we have to do what we have to do. And I think we hope that where the Data Act isn't an insular activity, we're not just going to do it within the federal space. Conversations like this and ongoing in the future will help us get the job done because we are collectively working on it together.
Yeah, so I definitely don't want to minimize the concern because it is a lot of work. And also it's a culture change because the way that we're approaching it, as Karen mentioned, that it's a game changer because we are moving everybody to work together and agree on a set of standards. And also there are a lot of processes have been really established for a very long time, not just for the agency, but for the stakeholders. So to try to just change that is not going to be a insignificant effort. And that's why we have to do it in a very prudent manner. While we don't want to build large systems to try to collect all the data into one place, there will be some system changes. Mm-hmm. And also, we don't want to make the change in such a way that the resources are spent just for short-term compliance purpose. So we are trying to make sure that we approach it in a very prudent way. In addition to the approach that Dave mentioned about the data-centric, which focus on really making the data more accessible by structuring them, so that not just for the Data Act purpose, but down the road, if they are for other type of requirements, that we are architecting that solution for the future access. But at the same time, we have to look at the timetable to make sure that how we are implementing is also taking into consideration a lot of the changes that are going on at the same time.
In terms of timetables and working on implementation, one of the things that's very much on the mind of the recipient organizations today, those that receive federal funds, is implementation of the uniform guidance, which took, I think it was 8 circulars and combined them into one. Our members are very much in the throes of implementing the uniform guidance now, and there are a lot of similar goals across the uniform guidance and the Data Act. For instance, one of the sections that I was reading in the uniform guidance today talked about setting standard business processes using data definitions. And wow, that certainly sounded familiar in terms of implementing the Data Act. So one of the things I was curious about in terms of issues that we're all having to work on right now is how you're aligning the implementation of the Data Act with the implementation of the uniform guidance.
Helena, that's a great question because, as you know, as we've been working in the trenches with AGA and the broader recipient community, the uniform guidance has been a 3+ year effort of transforming our grants management policies. And as you said, taking 8 circulars historically that were separate and distinct and putting them into one place, streamlining them, targeting those policies to be more risk-based, look at performance over simply compliance, and finally, hopefully streamlining reporting burden by really holding up data standardization as a way to lower reporting and some of the costs associated with it. So you're absolutely right. The nexus is there. I think unwittingly we didn't even know what we were that we were going to be so aligned with an upcoming Data Act when we were doing the uniform guidance. But I think the thoughts were all there. In terms of sort of implementing these together, it is, I think, all about collaboration. To the opening discussion that we had, all of these are connected. There's no way to artificially sever uniform guidance and grants management implementation from data standardization across the federal government. We know that the recipient community is right now full bore working on implementing the uniform guidance, modifying their business processes, working with federal agencies to understand how their particular awards are now applicable to these new policies. And so one of the things I think that is incredibly important as we move forward on Data Act is to have this conversation with the recipient community to highlight where there are direct and specific nexuses between our uniform guidance implementation and the Data Act, and very specific down to possibly provisions. Because I think what we need to be able to do is say, look, there are opportunities as recipients are implementing 2 CFR part, whatever it is. You all are also talking about Data Act implementation under this guidance. These need to be joined. I think having those conversations in real time will allow us to quickly figure out how to match and marry them up. I think our real-time effort in the Data Act, which is frankly a very fast-paced activity, will require us to collaborate with everybody as much in real time as possible. And we're going to rely on the communities writ large to really come to us and say, look, there's an issue that needs your attention. This has come to our attention, and we need to talk with you about it. I think we're also going to rely on all of you across the non-federal community and the federal community to just be really proactive in highlighting that, because we will not feel that as much as all of you feel it.
So we started talking a little bit about the data and what this will enable in fact-based decision making. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if all this data that we get together and integrate isn't fit for the purpose of making fact-based decisions, it's all for naught. So data quality, as I'm often saying, is really, really important in this conversation. So and I understand that generally speaking, it's the agency's data, is what I understand. What mechanisms or how will agencies go about managing the quality of the data that they're putting out to the public to ensure that it is something that integrates? But also above that, have you considered some sort of cross-government data governance body that will actually ensure that the data produced from the different silos across government will actually integrate, so that when we externally and when us data scientists start making predictive models, that we actually can take data and do apples-to-apples comparison? Where have you got with all the data quality stuff?
Yeah, so data quality is definitely very important, and there are many ways to approach that, and certainly ensuring there's governance. It's really important to institutionalize the data standards once you establish them, and having a governance is really important. But at the end of the day, I think data quality is also an incentive alignment issue. Today, the burden on the people who care about the data quality are the people who consume the data. So if we can align and make sure that the data providers are also the data consumer, meaning they're using their own data to make decisions, there are incentives. That's the proper alignment, and I believe that is the most fundamental way to address data quality. We can implement all kinds of internal control, governance. We're talking about a lot of data here, and those are important. And having those control in place, and also making sure that the way we are approaching and accessing the data are also consistent with some of the existing internal control framework that agencies already have through the financial reporting that are subject to a lot of discipline on data quality. But the most important thing, I think, the most important fundamental issue is the incentive alignment. If the agencies who are the data owner are also using their own data on a regular basis to make decisions, then they'll know they'll know that whether the data is good quality or not, and they will also have the incentive also to make sure that they get good quality.
So picking up on the data standards and data quality and that, and getting down to that level a little bit, I know there's already been sort of a group of data elements that have been put out there as your first salvo of elements that you're planning to probably standardize. Maybe some of them are easier to standardize than others. But I think there's a real set of questions out there from a lot of people as to when do we expect to have the full list of data elements that we need to standardize? Not even when are we going to get them all standardized, but when do we think we will have identified the data elements that we need to standardize? And I'm opening up the door that maybe somewhere down the road we'll identify a new one, or some new data will come up. But do you guys have a sense of the timeline where we'll at least have that list of elements that people can look at and say, these are the ones we are going to standardize?
So on GitHub, we have posted our list of data elements that we are working on. It is an incredibly large list of data elements. Some of them may be a little more straightforward. Others are incredibly complex. And as we think about aligning that data definition across multiple, when we say communities, we mean just different parts of an agency or a program that use that data. It's just an incredibly complicated task. I think to your question, Sean, about a complete list, I think one of the different ways in which we think about the Data Act is that it is we are in this literally forever. This is an ongoing process and a different way of doing business. Just as email changed how we interface, the Data Act is going to change how we think about getting our jobs done. Data standards is not a one-shot. Federal spending transparency today, and what we have determined is federal spending transparency in 5 years or 10 years may be different based on the data that has been out there and the user needs at that point. And so where we are is that I think we've identified our set. I think to a conversation that I know that across communities, across non-federal stakeholders, a question that has been raised is, what about new data elements? And I think we recognize very deeply that this is an ongoing process. We have identified our list of data elements, but I think we are under no impression that the conversation is still open as to what other work needs to be done. I think in thinking about data standards, the opportunity to, in addition to understanding what data elements should be standardized or could be standardized further, is kind of prioritization. Because as many of you know, having done data standards too, it is a resource-intensive task to bring all different communities together, all different users together. So one of the areas of help and I think ideas that we'd love to get to as we move through our weeks, months, years of data standards is what are the best ways to prioritize and tier how we standardize the data, in addition to how do we showcase that data on USA spending for the uses that at that moment in time the public and our federal community need and want.
So putting my technology hat on again, so I think about over on the decades of reporting requirements. There are systems, many systems, currently in place today government-wide for federal reporting. Data Act is requiring something a little bit differently. Can you speak a little bit, are your plans to take the data standards that you're working on now and implement those standards in the existing systems? In other words, change the existing systems to implement those standards? If so, what sort of timeline are you looking at? If not, how are you thinking about doing it? I guess, how are you thinking about doing it is really the question.
I think you probably know that every agencies are at different stage in terms of the modern nature of the system. Some are probably less than other. So we are taking a very much an agency-centric approach. I mentioned earlier about making sure that there is value proposition for the agency, that the data that we are making accessible, can also be consumed by them to make decisions. So every agency, depending on where they're at in terms of their system, technology, we want to work with them to make sure that the data standard can be implemented in the most prudent way. So we're not designating that you must implement data standard for this system. We want the agency to look across and look at all the data reporting requirements and think about how they really want to use this opportunity to make better access to their own data for decision making, and figure out which system is the best system for them to implement the data standard, and then ultimately making that data accessible.
That's a good overview of the federal agencies and what you're hoping they will do. One of the questions I have is, if you were a recipient, state, local government, university, nonprofit right now, what would you be doing to get ready for the Data Act? I think you talked very well about what the federal agencies should be doing to get ready, but what about the rest of the folks that after the pilots are going to be confronted with next steps?
It's an excellent question, and I know where we are. This conversation has been so wonderful. I know we're running out of time, so I want to make sure I can answer that question if there are any last questions as well. In terms of the states and our local government partners, what we're doing under the Data Act is for many states not new. Frankly, states and local jurisdictions have been far ahead of us as a federal government in thinking about data and using data to drive decisions. We've also seen under the Recovery Act, too, that states and local governments have thought differently about data, and they were frankly forced to as well in order to really fully implement the Recovery Act. And so as we move forward on the Data Act implementation, where the federal government, I think, is really trying to get to where some state and local governments are, I think one of the great questions that we'd love to hear more from those partners is, how are they currently using federal spending data? How would they need federal spending data to inform their decision making? What is the gap analysis for them? How do they currently use their own data And frankly, that is maybe more selfish of us because we want to have those best practices inform how we can use that data for ourselves. And to what extent is there an alignment or misalignment between the federal data and that government's data as well? Because I think, where from the federal perspective, this has to be something that we use so that there's high data quality. From a stakeholder recipient perspective, government perspective, the information has to be useful for them as well. So I think we may have time for one more question. And certainly this is not the last conversation we will ever have on this issue, but if there is one last question.
We've referenced the pilots in coming and going during this conversation. One of the things that our members are asking a lot is, how do we join the pilot? I know the pilot's supposed to start in May, but who's going to be able to participate? How do I get on a list? What are you going to be looking at? So if you could just provide a brief overview of the pilots.
Sure, and where HHS has been our partner on the grant side of the house and thinking about how to streamline recipient reporting burden, the pilot is going to be very age-traditional, frankly. I know that HHS did a webcast too about the pilot earlier this month, but we anticipate the pilot is going to have multiple dimensions, just like the multiple arms of the Data Act, so too for the specific provision of the Data Act in the pilot's multiple ways. There's going to be an open dialogue that we envision where we can solicit feedback from anyone who wants to. There's going to be opportunities too to think about, and to your earlier point, Helen, in your opening, how do we think about a one-stop? How do we think about a way in which to streamline reporting burden where we don't duplicate that reporting and really, from a uniform guidance perspective, embed those principles in the way we do business? So there are going to be opportunities to engage there. Within the federal sector, one of the big areas of work is how to embed those data standards in how we do business. And so HHS is leading the charge in thinking about how to reorient our grants business process to incorporate those. So much more to come. I think that we have, and we're anticipating that there is going to be a suite of different opportunities to engage from all different dimensions, both widespread to very concentrated. Where unfortunately our hour is quickly drawn to a close, I do want to thank very deeply our panelists today, Herschel, Helena, Sean, for spending the time with us and partnering with us, not just through this Data Act implementation, but frankly, we have worked with you through Recovery Act, through the initial FFATA, through all of our efforts for many, many years. I think Data Act is just the next chapter. And where this is more complicated and sort of bigger than all of us, these conversations must continue, and we very much look forward to doing so. Thank you to all of you here. Thank you to those of you who are also joining us and watching via webcast or streamed. We look forward to our next opportunity to talk with you, and there will be very much more to come.